listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author Sarah Box, where you get the inside scoop on the steps action takers and decision makers take to align their purpose to their principles and achieve their goals in business and life. We focus on the mantra, no labels, no limits, no excuses. And now, without further ado, please welcome your commanding coach with plenty of chutzpah and heart, Sarah Box.
Hi there, everyone. This is Sarah, your host of the No Labels, No Limits podcast, the podcast all about shedding our limiting labels and beliefs so we can live our dreams and shine our lights into the world. This week, we are joined by Jenn Whitmer. Now, Jenn describes herself, this cracks me up, as a recovering conflict avoider who used to moonwalk out of hard conversations. I love the visual and I can relate to the feeling. She now says, though, that our success rises and falls with our ability to manage conflict. And today, Jenn speaks, writes, and coaches about hard topics with her infectious joy. And you're going to get to meet her and feel that energy. And it is that energy and her joy, but also her ability to ask those big questions, plus the power of self-awareness through the Enneagram that make up Jenn's secret sauce in helping teams and leaders solve conflict and personality clashes. And those changes impact our leadership and every other relationship we have. A very cool thing I asked before we came on what she's reading, and she's reading Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, The Whole Person Workplace, and This Song Will Save Your Life. So one thing you know about Jenn, she is not a single option woman. She gets her words in. So, but today I am going to ask Jenn to share more about how conflict is experienced by the different Enneagram types, what each type needs to resolve conflict, and examples of the steps we can take to create peace from conflict. And as someone who has not always dealt the most professionally or peacefully with conflict, I am eager to learn more. So with that, let's welcome our guest, Jenn Whitmer. Hi, Jenn.
Hi, what an amazing introduction. Thank you so much.
It was really hard to figure out what I wanted to say because there's so much more I could have said, but there are many threads I would pull on the fabric that is your bio. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But I ask all of our guests this question, and that is whether there is something that you do every day, Jenn, that keeps you living true to your own purpose, your own calling.
What a fantastic question. I think I have developed the habit over time. Like this has not been a new thing, but I've developed the habit over time of having a few moments of silence every day, which for me is a huge discipline. But what those moments of silence, it allows for me, the anxieties that I keep at bay, the what ifs, like all of that with exciting action, helping other people, all that kind of stuff. Those moments of silence let the anxiety kind of bubble up and out. So and I can remember, this isn't about me. This is about me helping people. This is about me helping make the wrong things right in the world that lead to human flourishing. Like all of that is the work that I do. And if I'm ignoring the anxieties, I start to spin a little bit and I don't know why. So those moments of silence are really helpful to me.
I get it. I do. And developing it over time also. Okay. What I didn't share with folks is that you begin your journey at Oxford with music. So I want to know, how do you get from Oxford to the Enneagram? What is the story there?
Okay, so I should say that I spent 2 terms in Oxford. I did not do my entire undergraduate work there. But yeah, I was studying music and music history, and I was a music teacher. And always an Anglophile. So loved being in England, living there. Oxford is one of my favorite cities on the planet. And I loved being a music teacher. I loved the history of music because I love stories. And I love how stories express themselves through art that we get to participate in today. Like, some people don't know that Bach has 26 children. How does somebody with 26 children write so much work? Like, how do you be that prolific? Like, what is that about? And I get to connect with that through this beautiful work of art is amazing. So one of the things that hasn't changed is my love of stories and people. And so after I was a music teacher, I had 3 kids in 3 years. I had another one. And then I went back to work as an administrator in my children's private school. So I was, had this dream job that I loved in this school, that we had a leadership shift that changed everything. And really, conflict was the surface symptom of a lack of self-awareness and skill on our leadership. And it was devastating. It was devastating. And we as a team just couldn't, like, what is going on? And it started to impact all kinds of areas of our life. And so I left, and it was a really challenging time because I was actually fired, but then stayed on for this weird role. It was all kinds of difficulty. But in that time, I started really digging in, like, what's my role here? What am I contributing to this difficulty? And what do I need to know about conflict? Because like I said, I will moonwalk my way out of a conflict, and usually some kind of song and dance. So everybody's like, hey, aren't we laughing now? It's great. I didn't know that I was a conflict avoider by covering it up with, oh, it's fine because at least this is going to happen. I didn't know that was a form of conflict avoidance. And as I studied, I went back to school because, again, I was an educator. That's what we do. And so I went back to school and studied and really dug into culture, communication, and conflict resolution. And during that time of professional study, I was personally studying the Enneagram. And I was like, man, this has the depth of the Enneagram as a personality framework changed how I saw these surface level actions of conflict resolution, of cultural differences, of how we communicate. And I could see throughout different cultures the Enneagram applying because it's about what we're motivated by. And so with those two things together, I started really seeing, if I could help people and use my gift of teaching and making these kind of heavy things lighter, because they're so scary and they're so big and nobody wants to talk about it. If I can use those gifts and help people really solve conflict, that's the surface, but really figure out how to manage different personalities, I could really do so much good in a way that people wouldn't have to experience what I did. And I could really help leaders, because a lot of times they just are unskilled. And then when we're unskilled, we get insecure. When we get insecure, we get defensive. And when we get defensive, we tend to hurt people. And so if I could help people not get into that spot, that's a really exciting thing to do with my life. So yeah, that's my story.
Not a pretty story, right? The getting hurt, getting defensive, hurting people, not the story you want to write or be in.
No.
Yep. And that, I know that it turned for the better, but having to leave under those conditions, especially when you said it was a great job and you had a good team. And I mean, that must have been heartbreaking on some level.
Not on some level, on
every level.
On all the levels. Aww. It was. And lots of people have identity jobs, but teaching is an identity job. And I was an educator. That's what I did. And to lose that, like, I didn't know how to introduce myself. It was that simple. It was like when I left, I started consulting with another company and was helping them basically train on writing. Because one of the things I did was help teachers train about writing, again, storytelling. And I was, I didn't know how to introduce myself as that. Like I literally didn't know the words to say because I was as an identity and educator. So at my very core, it just was destructive in a way that really beautifully got rebuilt. I would rather have not had that happen, but I am grateful for the outcome.
Well, and had it not happened, you might not be here today doing what you're doing. Right?
Yeah,
Think
absolutely.
about the people who wouldn't get your benefit of what you've learned and grown from. When you started learning about the Enneagram and yourself, what was one of your first personal aha moments?
Well, I have to admit, I was first introduced to the Enneagram in college. So as a freshman, I was studying in this leadership program, and we were doing the Myers-Briggs. And one of the other faculty members at our school was like, you really should check out the Enneagram. And he gave us this like grid, and it had like a mimeograph. It was like a mimeograph sheet that had been copied, for those of you who are old enough to remember what mimeographs are. Like it was this weird purple dot matrix thing. And it was like, had these big scary words like lust and gluttony and deceit. And I was like, I can't even cope with that. I'm going to head back over here to my really fun Myers-Briggs and learn so much. And I did. So 20 years later, in the midst of this really challenging, horrible, toxic environment, one of the people that I worked with said, this is why I think the Enneagram is so helpful. Because I'd been using Myers-Briggs as an educator and a teacher and a faculty leader. And I was like, that's interesting. Because here's what I remember about it. But I was just at a place where I'm like, yeah, this is not working. I got to find something else what it is. And so it was really helpful to have this aha of, oh, if I'm one of these three types, I was kind of deciding it doesn't matter which one of these I am, I would still have been in conflict with this leader. And so some of this is not necessarily anyone's fault, but what exacerbated the issue was the lack of skill between us and not really understanding how to work through this conflict. So that was like, oh, okay, we all see differently. Like I knew that logically that we see differently, and I'd done Myers-Briggs work, so I knew that we saw differently, but at a core level that I am literally motivated for a different reason, it changed how I started to approach some things, and was really freeing for me because I also got to see where I was healthy and where I was unhealthy, and I could fix my part, and then, oh wait, that isn't solving this problem. I'm getting healthy and the other person is not. And it was really challenging. And so those were some of the big ahas at the beginning, like, oh, okay, we really see the world differently. Now what do we do?
Well, and I think for folks who've been, and just even thinking about it from a professional experience, that is common. It's really common, right? Because we're quote unquote hired, or we have a team or whatever to get something accomplished. Mm-hmm. And so in our heads, we think we have a picture of how we can do that and what we need, to do that in the best way. Because of course, our way of seeing the world isn't everybody see it that way. So, I mean, I do think that that's the first aha. It's like, I can make these changes in me, but beyond that, I can't force somebody to be different, but I could understand them better, mm-hmm. and perhaps use language and don't do other things that will automatically like rack up the tension.
Exactly. And then I could really see personally, like I'm using this, I'm starting to apply it to my own life, which is always the best for anything y'all learn, folks. Learn applying it to your own life first, but particularly the Enneagram. And I was starting to see my ability to change, which started to change how I was communicating with my husband and my kids and my friends. And these things were starting to go so much smoother. It started to shine a real light that actually this leader wasn't healthy. And I had more compassion for them at that point, but it helped me set some boundaries. Like it just led the path to health in a way that I don't think I could have anticipated, because I was a pretty good communicator before then, but it changed everything when I understood the motivation piece of it.
Do you know what number your leader was? I
don't.
What would have been your best guess? Given
my best guess, we go back and forth as hindsight is 2020. And I never love to like type other people. So
I understand
that. So the caveat is there is somewhere in there on the 369 train, somewhere in that aspect. And I think either a really unhealthy 3 or a really unhealthy 9. And it's so hard to tell where people are when they are in their own struggles and trauma.
Sure.
Because at a 7, I went full on into super stressful 1. I had to figure out how to, I guess I have to just do this and this and this and this and manage this process. And that didn't work super well either. It helped get some stuff done, but not, help all the things. So I think the it was a really challenging piece of learning. I think I'd say it that way. It was a really difficult way to learn something, but something that I don't have to relearn. Like I'm not going back to that place again.
One and done with that.
Yes. And thank you.
I think about that time going, that was a great lesson. I'm not forgetting that lesson because I'm not doing it twice. So I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by mismatch? So we talk about unhealthy conflict, and we're going to come back to that, but you also use the term mismanaged conflict. Can you dissect the two so that I'm not inadvertently applying the wrong terminology?
Yeah. So I think we have conflict that is mishandled. It is a couple different categories. When conflict is mishandled, often we assume it's somebody else's fault. So if I don't have the responsibility to do anything, then I can't fix it because it's someone else's fault. So then if I'm the leader and I think this is someone else's responsibility, I then don't step in to help solve, to help create options, to help bring connection. I don't do the steps because I have this idea that it's someone else's job. And I think as leaders, we can often get really tired because conflict is common. And if we don't know how to manage it, we mishandle it because we think, well, that's their problem. They got to figure it out. When often conflict requires somebody else to help them figure it out, or a process, because there's process conflict, there's systems conflict, there's personal conflict. And if you're mishandling a process and really it's a personal issue, you're going to apply the wrong solution to the problem. So I think those are different ways we mishandle conflict.
And this is, let me test and see if this is common for you as well. But oftentimes when I'm asked to work with an organization on planning or something else, right, the issue they'll say is a process issue. We need to fix this process. But as you have a conversation, you learn they want me as the consultant or coach to fix a person. It is not a process issue, which are easy, right? Those are technical fixes, easy peasy, diagnose, fix, you're on your way. But personal ones, right? So it's again that sidestepping piece. What do you do with that, Jenn, when you find yourself in a situation like that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I do like to look at process first, because sometimes things are getting blown out of proportion because of a bad process. So like, it's always important to look at your process. That's never something you should just assume is fine because those little frustrations can really add up. I think when we're talking about fixing a person, I never love that language. I mean, I know you're not talking about it that way, but people often like, can't you just fix them?
That's a common request though, behind the scenes when you're one-on-one with a leader, it's like, this is my problem. Can you make it better? Can you, it's common. It's just not public.
It's so common. It's so common. I'm not denying that. And I think, but when we have this idea that someone needs to be fixed rather than understand why they're doing that, that's the question. So what's the reasoning behind their actions? That's where we have to dig in. So my, bless her, my 12-year-old is somebody, she just kind of roams in circles. Like, and it's not that she's disobedient. She's not a rebellious kid. She's actually seemingly very compliant. But she goes away and then does not do the thing. And if you were not thinking, what is happening for her? What is causing this problem? As a parent, if she, obviously employers are not parents, but this similar idea of like, can't you just do this? How do I get you to fix it? So rather than what I've discovered is that I have asked her, what happens when you say yes, and then you walk away and don't do it? She's like, I honestly just forget. I get distracted by this, that, or the other. And so what we've worked out is, I need you to do this now, or I need you to do this in 5 minutes. And that has helped her change. She doesn't walk away and get distracted. Now, if I were just just get your stuff done. Like, why can't this person send their emails on time? Why can't this person, talk to a client better? Like, we get these like, like, why can't they just, is never a good start to a question. And then, so I'm always trying to help people lean into the curiosity. What are the reasons this behavior is coming up? And when we think about what are the reasons this behavior is coming up, first of all, it separates the emotion a little bit. We can have a little benevolent detachment. And then we move into solution providing, which is all conflict is. Conflict is solutions. And so those are the things when we walk into a situation and we're like, how do we fix this person? How can't they just step back and like, what are the reasons this is happening for them? You know, like emails on time. Do they not have a good email tracking system? I mean, I get overloaded with emails, but I have my system. You know, like I figured it out. Maybe that's what they need help with. And it's very simple, but we don't know that until we ask that question.
That curiosity, when you talk about having that curiosity, that is such a powerful approach, period, right? Is just to never assume you know.
Absolutely.
And just go, it's that whole thing like beginner's mind, even if I've known you for years. And it's hard. Like I think about you said that your relationships with your husband, your kids, all those started to improve when you started working on you, right? Same thing here. It's more like, oh, so I don't actually know what's going on in here, what's motivating, what happened 10 minutes before I walked in the room, none of that. So if you just start and go, I wonder what's really happening here. What happened when? Right. I love that approach because it does a couple things, like you said. It separates us, but it also allows that person to be who they are without having to get defensive.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it gets us to be specific. If we're going to help people in conflict or just in leadership, feedback always has to be specific. You have a vibe is never helpful and often offensive, you know, but when you do A, I respond with B, or I feel this, like it's a specific behavior we're addressing that changes like, I didn't know that. We can do this. And, you know, that changes how we communicate with people. Specificity is just incredibly important when we're giving feedback and trying to connect with other people.
And even the simple things, like I know people say, well, I emailed them, right? I'm thinking, are they an email person? And they go, I don't know. And I said, they might be a text person. Why don't you ask them, like call, asks, what's your preferred method of getting info? It's a simple question, because then they'll pay attention to you. But I mean, we assume like, I like it this way, doesn't everybody? So I think that's great. Will you talk about a little bit about how conflict is different? We talked about your approach and a little bit about the types, but can you go around and go, okay, this type, in case someone's listening and they know their type and they're going, oh yeah, conflict. But like, how do the types experience it? And then maybe a little bit about what that type needs to move forward so they're not stuck.
Yeah. So before I jump and go around the circle of the Enneagram, I want to give a basic definition of interpersonal conflict that I like to use. This is the definition I use. Conflict is when we have limited resources and differing goals. So if you experience limited resources, which are almost always going to fall into the buckets of time, money, people, and space. Time, money, people, and space, limited resources. And differing goals, which is our different Enneagram motivations. That's when we have the opportunity to have some conflict. And sometimes that conflict is a fire that explodes, and sometimes it is a solution we provide. And I'm always trying to get people to the solution we provide. So when you're thinking about conflict, that's what I want you to have in your head. It's limited resources and differing goals. In that process, of course, people get their feelings hurt. All of that is real. But if we can bring it back to that definition, it really helps us like solve problems. So when I think about Enneagram 8s fall into what I call the dynamite category. 8s, 4s, and 6s fall into this like dynamite. They're going to just come at it. Like we're ready to go. And they connect to the problem emotionally, which is kind of funny for an 8 who thinks, they're kind of emotion repressed, as we like to say, or unproductive. But really, this is where their passion and their anger, because they're fine with those two. And so that's where it really comes out. And the thing that eights, if you are in a conflict with an 8, the hardest thing is to remember is they want you to match them. Like, because you're like, okay, whatever. And that will probably annoy them more. And I think that's really challenging to remember.
Match in energy?
Match in energy. Like, yeah, stand up for yourself. If they're frustrated, you standing up calmly, but holding your ground is really important. The thing that is going to set an 8 off is they feel like you are controlling them. That will really set an 8 off. So you standing your ground and letting them have theirs is the tricky part about conflict with an 8. And so they don't want to be betrayed. They don't want to be hurt. They don't want to be controlled. So if they're experiencing that, if you're an 8, like you're like, totally, I don't want those things. I'm the warrior. I'm not going to show weakness. I'm going to, like it's right or wrong. And my opinion is right. And here we go. That's kind of an 8's posture. And so for 8s to remember that vulnerability is actually a strength is a really key thing for 8s to remember. Another thing I think is just a super practical tip for 8s is assume people are doing the best they can. 8s tend to assume that everybody can be doing more and that they're just not getting it. And they just need to step up and have the same level of energy and output that an 8 does. So for an 8 to assume that people are doing the best that they can really help them bring down the emotion to start to see problems. And the last thing for an 8 is 8s love black and white. Lots of people do. I mean, they're not the only number, but 8s really, really love a black and white. And so becoming more comfortable with gray, becoming more comfortable with other people have to get through their emotions before the conflict can be solved. Those are important things for 8s to remember.
So just let me test, 8s, given what you just said, aren't going to want someone who won't share their thoughts and opinions, but are they willing to wade through the emotional processes of the other person, or do they want that person to come and say, this is what I think?
They prefer that this is what we're doing. Okay. Like, here's what we're going to do.
Get into action.
Think about that. They're ready for action. So for the 8 to be patient with people sharing their emotions is what the 8 has to change. Okay. So, but if you are the person who has the emotions, you need to stand up and say, before we can move to action, I have to process through it in this way. And if you can hold that ground, 8s tend to be, because inside they're just these gushy teddy bears. They really, really are. And so if you can get that to them and they don't feel like you're trying to use your emotions to control them, that's really an important piece there. But sharing and owning your own stuff, emotions, thoughts, and actions is really important to an 8.
Fabulous.
So then I like to start with the 8s. I forgot to say that. And then we move to the 9s, and 9s fall into what I call the silver linings group. So 9s are the classic conflict avoiders of the Enneagram. They're going to merge with your idea just to avoid the conflict. They genuinely see all sides of the issue. Like, they're not making that up. They really can see that, oh, you think A and you think B and you think purple. I can see all of those things, even though somebody else were like, they don't even make any sense. 9s genuinely can see all of that. And so they go with the flow and they genuinely see all sides of the story. The part that trips them up is they want to keep the peace, but they're very lazy peacemakers. Like, we're just going to keep everything calm and smooth, but peacemaking is really active work. And that's a challenge for a 9. So if you're a 9 that is listening and you're like, I'm just a peacekeeper, I want everybody to be happy. You do. And what that does is it can create more conflict, because you're not actually addressing a root problem. And that's tricky for a 9. If you are a 9, the suggestion I really have for you is to remind yourself that your engagement matters. You might have to get still and quiet to know what you really think after you've heard A, B, and purple. You might have to really get quiet, but then know that that's an important part of the conversation. And I think the other thing for 9s to remember is to communicate their thoughts when they're asked. Sometimes 9s, we think they're agreeing with us because they're kind of saying, and but they're not necessarily agreeing. They're just participating in the verbal aspect of a conversation. And so really communicate if you feel differently. And that's the scary part. But knowing that your engagement matters and being willing to communicate that is really important. If you are in a conflict with a 9, you're not the 9, give them some time. If you ask me my thought on something, I'll probably jump in about 2.2 seconds with an idea and like, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. A 9 is going to need a moment. So give them more wait time, encourage them to speak up. If even outside of a conflict, like, hey, I'm going to want to talk to you about this later. I'd love for you to think about it so we can have a conversation about that. Now that might make them internally nervous because they're like, but if you've given them the specific topic and then the time to consider it, that's helpful for them to get their thoughts out.
Well, it doesn't make them feel like they just got pushed back on their heels.
Exactly.
Either, right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It's not an ambush.
It's not. Yes. Yes. And the 9s have to do work too. Like we all work together. We've got our work to do. So Enneagram 1s, as we go around the circle, I like to put Enneagram 1s in what I call the cool cucumber group. They are really looking for, 1s really love the rules and the framework and the policy, like the per my last email kind of like, or it's in your policy manual. 1s love that. And it's fantastic. For the rest of us, we've already made that decision. Actually, the policy answers this question, which is great. But they can run into trouble because they, much like 8s, kind of like my opinion is the way forward. But they don't feel as much as their opinion because they want to be in alignment with whatever the rule says. And so, but that's what the rule says. And that's what's good. And that's what gives me comfort. So if we're going outside of that, it makes me feel very insecure. And so know that when you're in a conflict with a 1, they're going to like refer back to the rule, whether that rule is published or not. Like it's an unspoken rule. They're going to refer back to that because that's where they go. And so they repress this anger because they feel like this situation is bad. And so they're going to try to like, well, here's what the rule is. So here's what we're going to do. And now we're done, because they're going to try to get through that conflict really fast. And because what they want is to feel good. Like I did the right thing. We did the right thing. And they can get very confused when other people don't care about doing the right thing. They're like, wait a second, what do you mean you don't? Because they think it can always be better. And that can be draining for other people who are like, can't we just rest for a moment? So for 1s, I would love for you to remember that idea of what is mine to do. This is also really important for 2s, but for 1s, like to accept the things I cannot control. that serenity of this is outside of my control, or that can be really calming and peaceful in a conflict. Like I don't actually have to make you good, like I don't have to make that happen for you. And also to really accept the beauty of imperfection. And that imperfection is very challenging for a 1, but that it also creates different opportunities and new ideas that may even be better, that help you get to what you always want, which is to make things better. And that can be challenging for the 1. If you are in a conflict with a 1, 1s take criticism very deeply. So I always suggest phrasing it with I statements of, I feel this when this happens, I feel this, and would you consider doing this? So when you leave the toaster out on the counter, I feel that 1 would never leave the toaster out on the counter. That's a terrible example. But hello. When you get frustrated, when I see that you're frustrated because I didn't put the trash away correctly, I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Would you consider letting me know in a different way that the trash isn't put away? Something, I'm clearly making up an example, but that owning it and not making them feel like, or not criticizing them, like you always tell me I'm doing it wrong. That's not going to get you anywhere. But owning it for yourself and then asking, would you consider a different action? 1s are very into competency. Yes, they will consider a different action. And I think that's a way forward with 1s.
That was great. I would fail your toaster test.
Oh, yeah. It's funny. I'm the one that puts the toaster away in our house. That's why I always use that example. For twos fall into that same category as nines, the silver linings group. And they are wanting to solve the problem quickly. So everybody feels really good because they feel the discomfort of the conflict. And so they just want everything to feel good. So they're going to give a lot of options or cop out and be like, fine. And like, it's fine. I'm just going to avoid that. The great thing about twos is they tend to see lots of novel situations, novel solutions for things, but they can be really temperamental in a conflict as soon as they feel like their solutions are unappreciated. And so if you're in the conflict and they've offered solutions and you just dismiss them out of hand, then you're going to run into some troubles with the two. And
do they just quit offering solutions and they just back off? Is that
often, not every two, but often that's where they're like, fine. And they might move to that position of 8 where they get really angry. That can be what's happened. Or they can kind of sulk a little and be like, fine, sure. Like it can be very passive aggressive. It depends, but often that trigger is that you didn't appreciate what I was trying to contribute here. I was trying to jump to your rescue. I was trying to provide solutions and you didn't appreciate that. And that can be that's the crux of the issue for them. So they're trying to make it all so everybody feels good because like, oh, well, at least, that kind of feeling. And so what I want twos to always remember is a slightly different question than ones, but that what is mine to do? Suzanne Stabile talks about that question. And I think it's so powerful for twos. What is mine to do? Do I have to solve this problem for them? Did they ask me for this solution? And really humbly wait to provide the options. That can be really challenging for the two, but that work. And then the other one for twos forever is boundaries, 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 and more boundaries. Those really help in conflict. Like this isn't actually, I don't have to get caught up in your emotional struggle, which is what a two does. They're like, I'm going to connect with you emotionally, which is what we love about them, but also it's what can cause them problems. And so if you're working with a two, passive aggressive return to passive aggressive does not help anybody. So it's not like, well, they're doing that, I'm going to do that. Try to keep them really open and appreciate the solution. Like, I can see why you suggested that. Here's what I'm concerned about and why I think that might not be the best for us. Take the time to add the extra words. They love the niceties. They love that, like, they feel connected. And as long as you're staying connected and you're solving through it, they'll stay with it. And you can stay with the two in the discussion.
okay?
All right, here we go. Threes. Threes are much like ones. They're in this competency group, this like cool cucumber. And they, in a conflict, they get very image focused and conflict feels like failure. And so threes also want to rush through it pretty quickly. And so they're going to like, okay, how do we get to the goal? Whatever my emotions are, I don't care. Whatever your emotions are, I don't care. How are we getting to the goal? And the goal is to get this conflict over. And the hard thing for threes is that they're seeing things with their emotions, but they're not using the emotions to help them solve the problem. And all decisions,
a little more about that. So to see with their emotions, but not using them.
Yeah.
That
so
can be
like,
a little tricky.
It is. So like, here's this emotion. I'm seeing it in the room, but you know what? I'm going to put it over here in this box and I'm going to process that later. I'm not going to worry about that now. I'm going to look for the facts. I'm going to look for the action steps. And that's what I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to use these emotions to help make this decision. And where that is a problem is all decisions are emotional decisions. And you're making decisions all the time in a conflict because you're trying to find a solution. So for threes, that's really challenging because they're like, these emotions are getting in the way of getting to the goal. And I don't feel competent. And that's what that cool cucumber group is about. And so they want to get to that goal. And so they're highly focused on tasks. And if you mess up the tasks that are getting in the goal, that can be a problem for the three. So for threes, because this is an image focused thing, and I feel like conflict is a failure, letting down the mask of, oh, this is upsetting to me. And here's why. You still have your data. I'm not saying throw out the data, but allowing the emotions to come in actually helps you get to the solution, which is what you want. And to really know that conflict is not failure. Conflict is inevitable. It's going to happen. And so if you can, as a 3, kind of go, okay, conflict is inevitable. I have skills to get me through this, even though I am upset, and just let them self-talk a little bit through that. That's what I want 3s to remember. If you're working with a 3, be very careful when you are offering a critique because of that achievement focus. That's very challenging for them. Also encourage them to ask them how they feel, because they're going to tell you what they think. And then if you ask them how they feel, they're probably going to tell you what they think again in a different way. So stick with it in asking them how they feel, and that will help them get to the solution. And offering how you feel in a way that isn't overly emotional is very helpful. So offering how you feel without being incredibly emotive can be a challenge for people, but is really helpful to a 3. They like things staying cool, calm, and collected. And the deeper the relationship, the more emotional you can be. I talk a lot about emotions at work. So we're still trying to stay whatever professional means. And that means having some self-regulation to express your emotions without being out of control. So that's really helpful to a 3.
Okay, so that's helpful. And the other thing I liked about the 3 that you said too was understanding the need for efficiency or the motivation, right?
Very much. Very much. And we have a lot of 3s in the American workforce. They kind of get elevated. It's just really common. Then we move to 4s. And 4s are back in that dynamite group with the 8s, and they genuinely cannot work through a conflict if they have not expressed their emotions. Now, 4s have to learn how to express their emotions, like I was just talking about, how to express emotions without being out of control about them. But you cannot get through a conflict with a 4 if you don't allow them to express their emotions, because it's not over for them. And if it's not over for one person, it is not over for both people.
So true.
Really, really important. No, we don't all have to feel happy at the end. I'm not saying that, which is really disappointing to me, but it does mean we've gotten to a point of closure. They often are worried that somebody else knows how to do this better than them. So somebody else can get through this, I'm kind of a mess. They can fall into this self-reflective, why does this always happen to me? Or if you're critiquing their work, it feels like a personal critique. A lot of 4s are in creative industries. And if you're working for a client and a designer is got this beautiful thing and the client's like, yeah, but I really don't like that color blue. A 4 can take that really personally, and they have to work through that. And so when you're in a conflict with a 4, letting them process through their emotions and also offering critiques that feel constructive and not personal is really, really important. One of the struggles that 4s have is they send mixed messages. They'll tell you one thing, but their body says something different. So be patient and ask them questions and let them come out with the deeper parts of them.
So would you ask a reflective question? So for instance, giving that precise example, like I'm having a conversation with you and you tell me, no, all is good, but I'm looking at your body language. I'm thinking, you are nowhere near the line of good, right? But would that set you back if I said, Jen, I know that you say you're good, but I just get a sense that something's off. Is there more we should talk about here? I mean, would you go in that direction, or is that too much?
I would. I think that is a perfect way to ask that question as well, because you're allowing them the out if they don't want to talk about it. But a 4 always wants to feel seen. And what you just demonstrated is that you see them. I see that it just doesn't totally look like you're great with this. Is there more you want to talk about? And you've opened the door for them to make the choice. It's a beautiful way to ask that question.
Well, and in a professional, I would back off. In a personal relationship, I'd go one more go at them if they said I'm fine.
Exactly. And you have to know your audience.
I
totally.
do. Well, because, it's like, okay, we'll come back to this when it feels better for you. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's totally fine as well. People get to set their own boundaries, but keeping that door open is really important. And then for 4s to really remember is that sometimes the known solution is a fine solution. Often fours get into conflicts because they want to create a new, novel, unique, special thing to make it happen. And actually, the dumb way we've been doing it, it's not dumb. It just is, it actually works really well. And that can be challenging for a four. So when you're talking through conflict, like, okay, that is something that it's acceptable. It's fine that it's not something fun or unique or special in that way. And just like we talked about, giving fours the opportunity to share and feel seen and connected is an important part of conflict resolution with a four. Then we move to the fives. Fives fall into the same cool cucumber competency group with ones and threes. And so they want to make sure that all the data is there. And so if you're a five and somebody just makes a decision and it has no factual background or strategic background, you're probably going to get frustrated. And so knowing that happens is really important for you. Yeah. So the other thing that fives do is they can detach from their emotions so much. And what they're doing is like, so I can be competent, so I can be capable, I can be not ignorant, like I want to know, and think. And so one of the important aspects for fives is also to bring those emotions in. Like, it's okay that our emotions are a part of conflict. Actually removing the emotions from conflict doesn't solve it. And I think if fives can see that as a formula, that, emotions are a part of the formula, even though it's the part I'm uncomfortable with, that's okay. It helps them kind of make their mind make sense of it. And the facts are so important. That's what they bring to us, and the data, and often a relevant piece of data from so long ago, they're like, but here, that can be really helpful for fives. So if you're in a conflict with a five, listening to them, what are the reasons you think that? They're going to be able to answer that all day long. I think the hard thing for a five is answering the question, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do to solve this problem? Because they are bringing their observations and their strategies, but they don't always know, I have to have a solution that I'm then going to act on. And so for fives, oftentimes it's asking for the space. I can't do all of this right now. I need to take 15 minutes to think through it myself and come back. And so the important part for the five is to come back, set a time limit on it. Maybe it's not 15 minutes, maybe it's a day and a half, whatever it is, but give it time. I do want to think through this. And that is caring to the person who is on the other side to say, absolutely, but I am going to check back with you in 15 minutes. Or I am whatever the decided time is, April 15th, we're coming back, and we're going to come back and talk about this. That's really, really important. But what that time does is helps the five get in touch with their emotions, see the facts that they want, and then come to a conclusion, because they kind of have all these decision trees happening and then they can come with a couple options. But the setting the time to re-engage is really, really important.
That's perfect for a five.
Do you feel seen?
Well, I feel seen. But the other thing is understanding that and honestly, I came to this later in understanding my thought processes. The one question in a conflict that I do not like to be asked, because I honestly can't answer it in the moment, I can answer it and come back, like you said, is how do you feel about that? And it's I have no clue how I feel about that. I can tell you what the impact on everybody else in the room is going to be if we do X. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you I don't like X, period. because it's going to be bad for us as a team, right? But my solution, I need to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that time piece is really important.
Mm-hmm. It's so valuable for us to consider that conflict isn't one and done. Conflict is an ongoing creation together to get to a solution. That's what we're working toward. And sometimes that takes time.
And do you find if you keep building those skills and muscles, especially with the same team, the time it takes to come to solution gets much shorter, right? It's you get
100%.
Yeah, you get a shorthand.
Absolutely.
But you have to do the work.
You have to do the work. First, you have to build the trust. Then you have to learn how to have conflict. I mean, that's Patrick Lencioni's organizational health. That's where you go. And that's why conflict is so important, because you can't do all the rest of it if you don't know how to fight through even what are our values. Like if you can't have those types of open conversations, and time is sometimes what you need to do that.
One of the missing resources, right?
Exactly. Time, money, people, and space. So then we move
on
to the sixes. So Enneagram sixes fall into that dynamite category. They get very much like, oh, aren't you upset about this? Like they're intensely with it because they're very in touch with their anxiety, and they would like other people to match that intensity of anxiety. Like, aren't you upset about this? Can't you see this too? What is interesting about sixes is they can have almost like this. It seems like a little Jekyll and Hyde happening for them, because they'll be like, whatever the authority says, this is the rule. Okay. But then all of a sudden that makes me anxious. So nope, I'm just going to make this decision. I'm just going to move over here and we're going to do this. And so they can quickly appease, or they're going to push the whole time and feel like a rebel. And so one of the things that sixes do great in a conflict is they ask questions. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? What about this? One of the things that can be very frustrating for their conversational partners is that they ask questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? And so that two-edged sword in a conflict can be challenging for the six. And so sixes, to know about a six is that they're fiercely loyal, and all of those questions are coming from a place they want to make sure everybody is safe and secure. And knowing that is really helpful when you're like, this is the 82nd question I've got about this one thing. It's because it's coming from a place of they want context and they want everyone to feel safe. So for sixes to remember is that you are safe and secure and that you have good solutions. Like they have to remember that, but also to prioritize your questions. If I could only ask 5 questions, what's the most important one? Like if I got to answer that one, it would answer all these other little questions that I have. And that teaches the 6 to really keep moving forward with what's the most important thing, rather than getting caught up in all of this internal thought process. And for a person who is in conflict with a 6 to really say, I know these questions are important to you. They're not unimportant. However, X, Y, and Z, like acknowledge that they genuinely are important, that they're important to us, but we need to get to this thing. Like, is there a way, what's your most important question? Kind of lead them down that path is really important. That's just a way to help the 6 work through the conflict and acknowledge their intensity about that. So that's my 6s.
I love the 6s. Of course, that's a strong wing for me. But I do that, the way you phrase that about if you could only ask 5 questions. And I just, want to say that is a powerful thing to ask in teams too. And I ask it separately often, like just write them down, because it's so great when you find out like the top 5 questions, if we pull them together, oftentimes they're very similar. And if we can get through those, people go, okay, I felt heard, even if and also if you're a 3 and you want efficiency, it's only 5 questions I got to wade through.
Exactly.
Like, I can last for 5 questions.
Exactly. It's so good. So good.
So let's move on to you.
I know, the 7s. So the 7s fall into that silver linings group. They're like, oh, it's totally fine. There's no conflict here. Why don't we just do this? And sometimes 7s don't realize that they are hurting other people when they move so quickly through those. When they're moving to the bright side so fast, they don't recognize all the time that they're hurting somebody in the interim. Like feelings get hurt, ideas get squashed, because they're looking at the big picture and brainstorming, not recognizing that other people aren't there yet. Like they're not in that same place. And not that place is better, but it's just a different space to come from, this idea of possibility. Or not wanting to experience discomfort from other people. So I want to make you happy, so you're stop being unhappy in my presence. So, well, at least is something that a 7 will often say. So they can forget that the feelings of others and their own excitement, or in their ability or their desire to get out of this. 7s also deeply believe they can convince you. If I can convince you that this is the right way forward. And so when you're experiencing that from a 7, it's because they genuinely think I know that this is the greatest thing and I can woo you over to my side. And if I can't woo you, I can at least pester you to let me do it because I figured out why this is helpful for you as well. So when I had my first baby, I was going back to work and I needed to figure out a time to be able to pump during the school day. I was nursing, and the schedule, I had like 6 classes in a row. It was a crazy schedule. I had like 4 hours of straight teaching without any kind of break. And like, I couldn't do that with a newborn. And so I literally rearranged the whole school schedule so I could have a short break in the morning, lunch, short break in the afternoon. It cut my plan time into some really chunky bits, but it actually worked out better for a few other situations. And because I could convince you, I could make this work. And so that's the feeling from the 7. What the 7 has to remember is to really listen to other people because their ideas are coming so fast and so furious that the idea of listening to somebody else and adding to that cacophony can feel really overwhelming. So knowing that you have enough, that if you forget an idea, it's okay. It will come back, or maybe someone else will offer it, so slowing down and being okay with silence for others to process is huge for 7s in a conflict. Like just waiting in the silence. That's really hard for the 7. But in a conflict, it helps so much because it gives people that opportunity to keep talking and say, oh, here's what I think. And you start to create that workable togetherness rather than feeling ramrodded through or that this doesn't even exist.
So for a 7, so we talked about like if you shoot down, quote unquote, shoot down a different numbers idea, they'll take it really personal. They'll feel hurt, right? Mm-hmm. But for a 7, because you are this magnificent idea generator, well, really, I mean, there's an option here to be able to say, what else you got? Yeah. Right? Like that's pretty close, but what else do you have? Is that something a 7 would hear willingly, or would they go, I already gave you a bunch?
I think most 7s would be like, okay, I don't have any more. Let's talk about these. Like they would feel heard, because one of the things that will really rile up a 7, like this will really, if you poo-poo their ideas, like if you're just being wet blanket, like this will never work, and you don't even entertain the possibility for a hot second, that's really frustrating for a 7. So giving them the opportunity to almost have that like, no, I'm out of ideas for now. Okay, let's keep going. Like now let's talk about these ideas is really, really helpful for the 7.
Yeah, it's powerful. Mm-hmm. And you can always come back. The door's not shut.
Totally.
Right? We're not done with this. We're just done with this for now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And tip to 7s, if you're trying to woo a 5, just say, I know this will really work. No one else in history's ever done it. But you know what I'll do? Let me do it for a week and I'll keep some data for you and then we can talk about it. Just let me pilot this.
Totally.
I guarantee you every single time I'm going, just a week? Okay, let's do it, right?
Let's do it. Yeah. They'll come back with data. And here's the funny thing. 7s actually really love data. Their ideas are rarely out of something that isn't going to work. They've made a pattern and they just might not have their handle on the quantitative data. They can find it.
I'm sure they can. I love my 7s. Actually, all the numbers bring so much richness to what we do together, especially as teams, and I just think that recognizing the differences. Do you notice how I said I just think because I don't feel it? I just think it. Little self-deprecating humor here, but honestly, that's true. But when we can pull the best from each other, it also encourages us to show up in conflict. It's like, this is not a dangerous place for me. 9 times out of 10, it's never been, but now I feel really uncomfortable in conflict. Can I trust that it's still the same place? Now, if it's not the same place, you don't want to be ignorant and just go, I'm going all in, because you can get hurt. You want to think about it, but to just give some, I guess, grace to your other team members and going, we're all new at this, or it's uncomfortable for all of us, but for different reasons.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things, if I can help, it doesn't matter what number you are, is that if you can get through and just normalize that conflict is awkward, that it is messy in the middle, like, okay, but that's where the magic happens. That's where we build connections. That's where we come up with the best ideas. That's where we build trust. because I'm speaking to you in a way that is respectful, even though I'm frustrated. All of that, even though like it kind of makes me go, even though I know that it is true, if we can all just normalize that feeling that doesn't mean it's bad, then we can all move forward in conflict.
And that's kind of like any new thing or any new stretch we have to do in life, right? It all feels a bit scary. And then you do it and you're going, okay, I lived through that. It wasn't that bad. And the next time it's still probably a little scary, but it's not as scary.
Exactly.
So we can build our conflict chops. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what's coming up for you that you're super excited about. I've got 2 more short questions for you, but I do want to know, I know you've got something coming up that's exciting.
Yes. So I'm doing some really fun conferences this year talking about self-awareness and burnout and conflict resolution and how that helps us as leaders. And I also have a TEDx coming up. So that's really exciting at McMaster University. So, and I'm talking about this idea that conflict is opportunity, and it's how we build relationships. So I'm really excited about that coming up.
Sweet. That'll be a great conference.
Yeah.
And you do have something our listeners can grab from your website, right?
Absolutely. So I have a few things. If you go to jennwhitmer.com/freebies, there is a 20 helpful phrases in difficult conversations freebie there. And what that is just a download, but it breaks out some helpful scripts. I know for me, sometimes if you haven't figured it out, I talk really fast and I can get my words tripped up, especially when I'm nervous and I'm like, oh, that's not how I wanted to say it, or that wasn't the helpful way to say it. So if I can have a phrase to get myself started, it like uncements my tongue. That's what that free download is. And so it's got different phrases for how to start a conversation, what to say in that middle, how do you end it well, and it's broken down into those 3 categories.
Sweet. And then what, I know you have given a nice discount for folks who want to get your communication guide as well.
Yes. So if you want that, once you get the freebie, you can grab it for $17. Normally it's $35 if you just buy it off my website, but that's what you can have. So, and that goes through the different Enneagram types and how they communicate, not just in conflict, but just in general, and what's great about them and what each type can work on. So as a guide for yourself, but also, gosh, I know I'm in this, team with a 5. How can I communicate better with the 5? And some things that will offer you for each type and how communication works in general, and then down into the Enneagram types.
So that's really a huge value. That's a bonus for $17. Just 10 minutes of saving someone grief is worth that right there.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love this quote of yours that says, if you avoid conflict, you manufacture fake peace.
Mm-hmm.
So on that quote, I ask you my last question, which is, if you were now going to sit down with your 8-year-old Jenn, what would you tell her about the road ahead?
Oh, my word. If you avoid conflict, you manufacture fake peace. 8-year-old Jenn needs to know that just because people laugh doesn't mean the conflict is over.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. Thanks, Jenn, for being a guest. Yeah, when we do, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for being a guest. I've so enjoyed both your energy, but you have shared so much wisdom and great value in this conversation that I can't thank you enough.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the No Labels, No Limits podcast with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic vision coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah at sarahbox.com/No Labels, No Limits podcast. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible. So please remember to rate, leave a 5-star review, and share the podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. Until next time, keep taking those daily action steps to align your purpose to your principles and achieve your goals in business and life.